Welcome to the fine print, ladies and gentlemen. Happy New Year's. My name is Caleb Teskey, and I'm psyched to start off this new year with Cole Preston from the Chillinois podcast. Cole, it's a pleasure to have you on here finally, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Caleb. Really
My
excited for
pleasure.
this.
Yeah, dude. Before we talk about any kind of shop, would you mind sharing your 5-minute life story with us?
Sure. Um, so I've always found the way that we um well, let me just start this way. I grew up and I feel like I'm one of the last like 20-year-olds that's able to say that they saw the end of alcohol prohibition. The town that I grew up in, I remember when I was really young that our family, we were putting these signs in the yard that said vote no on prohibition. And I was like, "What, Mom? Why are we doing this?" And she's like, "Well, we have to go to this town. You know how we go 20 minutes to the store sometimes just to get beer if we're going to a football game or whatever. That's why. That's why. Like, there's a reason it's not sold here, and it's because our town does not allow alcohol to be sold, right?
You are
And
from a
so,
dry county?
mhm.
Oh,
A dry
interesting.
town, actually, a dry
Okay.
town. It may have been a dry county back in the day. I don't know the extent of the history on that, but yeah, a dry town at the time. And so to learn that that was even a thing, that like the town can say what can and can't be in the stores, was a really intriguing thing to me as a young person. And so, fast forward of 10 10 years or so when I turned 21, because I feel like that was when I was like between 8 and 11 that all that was going on. So fast forward to when I was 21, which I'm trying to think of what year that was. I'm sorry, I can't remember. But Colorado had legalized weed by then. And it was another instance in where, so first of all, I'd turned 21 and people brought me out for my first drink, and it was okay, but it wasn't like this thing everybody else made it to be, right? I was like, I mean, I could get beer before. I will say beer was always harder to get than weed, which is
Yeah.
kind of an interesting
Yeah.
um, thing there. But anyways, like I just never was really infatuated with beer, but I was always a stoner since I was in like 8th or 7th grade, and so I was laying there the night of my 21st birthday, and I was like, this wasn't all that I thought it was going to be. All those things I was saying. I was like, what could I do to make it feel that way? And I was like, Colorado has legal weed and I'm 21 now, and that'd be super fucking cool. And I was like, how far away is Colorado? It was about 15 hours. And I was like, fuck it, I'll do that. So the next day after work, I just packed up some stuff and hit the road. And I didn't even tell my parents, actually. I lived with my parents at the time. I was 21 though. So I was like, fuck them. I can just tell them when I'm there. Right. And yeah, went to Colorado, and it was just crazy because of course I drove there with weed. How are you going to get through a 15-hour drive? But the whole time I'm paranoid as fuck until I crossed that line. And then I was like, oh, I'm in a state where weed is legal. It doesn't matter that I didn't get it from the store. The weed is legal, you know, and it was just this freeing feeling. And it brought me back to childhood. And I was like, I just crossed this imaginary line, and all of a sudden what can and can't be sold in stores is different.
Yeah.
And it was just this reminder of the weird time in history we live in. And so I know that may have been a weird answer of my life story, but it's really how I got into doing my podcast, and it's really like the driving force behind my
Well,
fascination
that was the
with.
next question, was sort of I was going to build to how you get into the podcast. So thank you for doing my own segue for me there.
Yeah, I mean, uh, cannabis legalization is something we talk about a lot, but we also talk about, psychedelics and um, religion, whether it be with people that are religious or with people that aren't, or with people like we had the Satanic Temple of Illinois, which is a religion. But if you don't know about the Satanic Temple, it's not probably what you think it is. For example, just really quick, they
Yeah,
don't
no,
even
this is
actually
this is
believe in
also on
Satan.
my list. So go ahead, man.
Cool. I was just going to say, yeah, the Satanic Temple, they don't have actually even believe in Satan or God. yet they're a religion. It's a very interesting thing. So just if you haven't learned about it, you can check out my episode with the Satanic Temple, or do your own research. I know Satan Con is coming up. It's in Boston this year. I wish I could go. That sounds super cool to go to. But anyways, I digress. We talk about anything and everything, and the reason that we talk about most of the things we talk about is because it's like, as you may have, besides religion, drugs, all these things are kind of in this taboo, or rather they're looked at as taboo, and there's a lot of cultural stigma surrounding them. At the same time, you're seeing these industries come up. So it's like these quasi-legal products, and it's just fascinating, like so cannabis legalization, psychedelic decriminalization that we've seen in Colorado. That's going to be super fascinating to see how that plays out. I think technically that all took effect yesterday. Of course, everybody was already growing mushrooms and stuff, but like
No
I think
shit.
technically it took effect yesterday. I might be wrong on that. I'm
And
not
I
from
believe we had
Colorado.
a mutual guest, Victoria Littman, who had some fascinating insight in terms of psychedelics and religion.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm kind of going anywhere or I'm going all over the map because that's really what my podcast is. A lot of people think of us as a cannabis podcast, and you can see my little logo down here. He's got a
Sure.
bag of weed for sure. I mean, we leaned into that logo because Illinois just had legalized weed. But I have more plans in the future, like to lean into different topics. We definitely have leaned hard into cannabis. So why don't we talk about that for a little? I mean, I don't want to do
I
you have
actually was
sorry,
hoping we
I'm
could talk about that after. I wanted
sure.
to ask you because as someone who's curating your own podcast, I
Yeah.
was super curious how you went about sort of selecting your guests at the beginning, because I also did not intend to focus this heavily on cannabis. I wanted to do a lot of artist spotlights, and that's going to be coming more in this next year. But I'm curious how you sort of like, who was your first guest, and how did you go after that, sort of looking for more people?
That's a really good question. I'm glad you actually peeled the page because this is good stuff to think about. I think my first guest was a person named Mike Malcolm, who I'm still pretty good friends with. And he runs a weed brand, and well, he's got a weed brand in Illinois. It's Kranja. They're not selling weed in Illinois, but they've got like cannabis accessories in dispensaries. So I think he was my first guest, but like just to your general like question, like how I got it started. Mike was definitely like an awesome guest to get, but to an extent, I look back at some of my early guests, and I had like the Illinois Hemp Growers Association on, and people like that. But I even had people like licensed cultivators in the state of Illinois, like Cresco Labs on, which is a big name. And in fact, I
Really?
think our first episode was me doing a giveaway with Cresco. It was called the Safer at Home giveaway. And
Wow.
it's something that I know I'm bouncing around, but
No, no,
I
no, you're good.
helped to moderate IL Trees, which is a subreddit. And so everybody was locked up with COVID at the time. And so they came up with this idea, Safer at Home giveaway, because adult use cannabis had just, kind of launched, and they wanted to be the outreach to the community, and they saw me as that person. And I
Wow.
guess what I'm trying to say is, back to your question, like the way I started was kind of just with access journalism, if you want to call it that. I've not gotten a lot of critiques about that, but I look back at some of the interviews that I did with like companies like that, and I have critiques of my own. But it's like I didn't know what I know now, and so it's hard to fault myself. Like
So
for
you jumped in.
example,
It sounds like you jumped into the kind of the deep end here.
yeah, I mean, yeah, I was talking to like, I mean, at least with regards to some of the companies I was speaking to, like I didn't realize um what they had done in Illinois, right? And it's not just the company that I mentioned. It's like basically all of them, as we have broken down in a recent episode, which we can talk about later. Um, but yeah, I mean, the way I started was just with kind of what you could call access journalism. What I'm really still proud about if you listen to it every step along the way. It's not like I was like simping for any company. And in fact, very early on, when I started to figure out what was going on, I didn't hesitate to say, and I will never stop saying, fuck companies like Cresco, fuck companies that, you know, look and endorse limited licensed markets and lobby against things like home grow. Like, fuck people like that, you know, because that's the continued criminalization of cannabis. And I'm proud of myself, I guess. What I'm trying to say is, while I may have been soft on people like that in interviews because I was trying to build a portfolio, I'm still glad that every step along the way, and you look at like the things I've posted forever, it's never been like this simping for the industry perspective. Like,
No,
I've
and
always kind of
that's a
questioned, you know.
it's a great point too, because, and you know, quite frankly, those are some of the people I'd love to interview. I
Mm-hmm.
want to interview people that I don't agree with, and those are pretty much the people in this industry.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And it's hard to get them on, and you know, you seem to have done a really good job with that. Although I suspect that you're a little quieter than me, which gets me in trouble sometimes because I sometimes talk too much.
Yeah, well, I've been wondering lately if that's what I've been doing because, you know, I've had people that I feel like would have come on in the past that have since like not come on, and I don't know if it's because they're busy with legislation or if they feel like my views have evolved in a way that's like I'm a wild card. I'm not trying to
Uh,
pat myself on the back, but I kind of do try to question everything and like what really is the angle. And yeah, it's hard without diving into any of these specific topics to kind of get specific on what I'm talking about. But yeah, like I say,
well, so what are you
real
talking about? You're talking about legislators you've approached that maybe won't come on the show now. Is that what we're talking about?
Oh yeah, I mean for sure. Like I have legislators that will answer my emails like and I'll reply to that email and be like, and now that I've got your attention, you want to come on my show, and they just won't answer, right? You know, so I get it, I guess. But really quick before we like move too far away from it, like
Sure.
it is something that I have like just openly and candidly I've beat myself up about, like doing access journalism and maybe pulling punches instead of going through with them. But at the same time, I look back at where I was and my understanding, and it's like it would have been really brash for me to start throwing punches that early on without having established the self that I am, like without having established the fact that I am acting in good faith. I'm not just trying to fucking throw punches.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, I'm trying to come from an informed perspective. And
You
so,
know, and I appreciate you
yeah,
saying that, man, because I feel very much the same way. You know, I wanted to come out the gate and just start swinging. And I feel like I very
right.
much could. I feel like I have all the facts. But you know, again, that's a feeling, you know, and I should not always trust my feelings because they have misled me once in a while. And I agree with you 100%. Like my first interview was with a woman from Vermont Department of Health. She was the division director of the it was the Division of Substance Abuse Programs, Prevention. I can't remember the exact name, but it was a great interview for my first interview. And I had some pamphlets from the Department of Health that I wanted to really bust her balls about because I feel like they cherry pick statistics and they're still using a lot of fear based education. And I wanted to really bust her balls about that and hold her feet to the fire. And I was so happy to have her on. And then we started talking, and like in the first 2 minutes, I started thinking, you know what? Like, I actually kind of like this lady. Like, I think we could have a really good conversation here. And I'm not going to just immediately start swinging. And that actually became my approach for the last year that I've been doing interviews. And honestly, um, I know what you call it, access journalism.
Yeah.
It's hard to get into this shit. People
Mm-hmm.
don't know you, they don't trust you.
Right.
You have to build all those relationships yourself. And I think that part of doing that is being willing to engage with people that might not necessarily agree with you and have civil conversations with those people, you know, on the record.
Mm-hmm.
Any thoughts on that sentiment?
Yeah, I mean, something I've leaned into. You've brought it up a few times, and you talk about, you know, talking about specifically with people you disagree with. I've sat down with the people from Smart Approaches to Marijuana a few times now,
Really?
and I enjoy
That's on my
that
list
because,
too. Yeah.
yeah, you gotta reach out to Jordan. He's really cool, and I'm sure he'd be willing to. I mean, cool as you can be for Sam.
Sure.
No offense, Jordan. You know, we just disagree on things.
I don't care as long as
Um,
you're civil, dude. I'll talk to anybody. If you want to be a
yeah,
dick too, we could play that game, and I'm pretty good. Oh shit!
Well, and that
Hang on. Sorry, I set off
no
my
problem.
smoke alarm. Okay. All right. Thank you for bearing with me there while I fucking scare the shit out of our dogs.
Yeah, no, I was just hoping, like, I was like, damn, I guess I must have been spitting fire. I set off your fire alarms. I'm just joking. We were talking about disagreeing with people, and
Yes, please.
yeah, I mean, I've had Jordan Davidson from Smart Approaches to Marijuana on a few times, which if you don't know who the group is, for your folks that are listening or watching, they're one of the, I would say, most well-known anti-cannabis groups in the United States, and it's just well known. I
Would you
wouldn't
describe
say,
them as anti-cannabis?
yeah, absolutely, yeah. I mean, no question about it. They try to take this middle ground stance, but I fundamentally believe that they have this, like, it's like, it feels like a teams thing. They look for anything that's negative and they're like, see, we were right. Like, they have not, there's, and I, anyways, I don't mean to get too deep into it, but I
No,
truly
that's
do
something I
believe that
want to get
it's,
deep into. So
yeah.
we can do it now or later, but that's going to happen here, hopefully.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I just to quickly wrap up that point, and then we can get into that if you'd like.
Sure, please.
Yeah, I want to talk to people that not only I disagree with, but maybe I might be critical of. So Jordan Davidson is a person that we definitely disagree on most things, and I was still able to perform every interview with him, professionally, without, saying names or anything. And in fact, recently, just to plug one, I did an episode with Justin Streckel, who's a former political director at Normal and National Normal. And so I hosted a conversation between him and Jordan, which was
Okay,
amazing
that's what
because
I think I just watched recently. Yeah, yeah.
they go and lobby at Washington D.C. on opposite sides of this issue, and they've never really talked head to head. So I wanted to facilitate that conversation, and so that was
Which I
very
really
interesting.
enjoyed actually, and I thought that was kind of a slick move on your part, man.
Thank you,
Yeah.
thank you. But I like to be able to just to, yeah, like I say, to wrap this single point up. Like, I like to be able to have something to point to be like, look, I can have people that I absolutely disagree with, or I can even have people where I'm like minorly critical of them. No matter what, I'm gonna be respectful because you're another person, and I like to be able to have stuff to point to. And so I feel like it kind of wraps back to the question we were on before. I kind of had to do those things to get to where I am, to be able to do the things I'm doing now, to facilitate that type of conversation. Like,
Sure.
I don't think either of them would have trusted me, either of them. And, I agree with Justin on a lot of things, but I don't know that he would have trusted me without having had interviewed him before and without having been able to point to things to say, like, oh yeah, you're going to be able to handle a conversation
And who
between
was
me
the
and
other guy?
so Justin is from Normal,
Okay.
the former political director of Normal, and Jordan is from Smart Approaches to
And you've had
Marijuana.
them both on your show prior to this.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So
Yeah.
you could also be like, hey, look, I've interviewed the guy that's going to come on and sort of debate you also.
Uh-huh. No, that's actually what I did. I was like totally candid with Jordan. We went back and forth, and I was like, hey, this is who I'm setting you up with. I've had him on before. And in fact, if you listen to that episode with him, we talked about you. So if you want to hear what he thinks about you before you talk to him, I'm not going to, hide that from you.
And
Prepare yourself.
it
Yeah.
sounded like you kind of just stayed out of the way and let them go at it, and you served as sort of a moderator, I want to say,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
on a very limited capacity too, I might add.
I would say that's accurate. Yeah. Thank you.
How did it go, man? How do you feel it went? I watched it, but I want to know how you felt it went, and like, do you think both those guys would come back on after that conversation?
Oh yeah. I mean, Jordan and I still continue to speak to this day. We'll have dinner one of these days, and it's going to make people's heads explode because I don't like, look, it's actually very personal to me that he lobbies for things that would put me in jail. And I'm candid with him about that. Like, you think I should be locked in a cage, Jordan? Because that's what you're saying right now. But we still can talk about other things, and I'm not just gonna. So, anyways, what was your question? How did I feel it went? I
Yeah.
feel like I didn't convince anybody who didn't believe anything they already believed, but I do believe that if you didn't, and that's the thing, that video, that debate wasn't made for this year. It wasn't made for now. It was made for history and for people to that are on the fence in the future, or maybe now, but really it's just for people that are on the fence to pick, you know, where to lie, I guess. And I think that because I don't think I'm going to convince somebody that's like against cannabis watching that they're going to be like, oh yeah, it's okay now.
It's
And
hard, dude. That's a tough sell to
yeah,
convince those people to change their minds. Yeah,
but
I'm with
I
you.
truly believe that if anybody was on the fence, I think that that's where I probably was successful.
Mm.
I think, and I don't know what exactly that means. I know that that's kind of vague. I could have pushed somebody to the anti-pot side. I could have pushed somebody to the pro-pot side.
Huh.
Either way, though, that's a success for me if somebody was on the fence.
Sure. Yeah, and those are really the people that you're looking to convince of things, right? Is there are some people, it seems like, especially when it comes to cannabis, that are just not willing to budge at all. And
Mm-hmm.
I've engaged with some of these people and I've tried to do my best, education session. And I feel like it's just a waste of breath with some people.
Yeah. And I don't know. I guess I would just say that, like with smart approaches to marijuana, I've tried to give Jordan like the candid advice that I feel like they missed the mark. They could like actually talk about smart approaches to marijuana, like, hey, smoking a joint isn't very healthy, probably. Maybe edibles are a better option because you're not, like they could actually give smart approaches to marijuana instead of misleading people and talking about like potency limits and like drawing conclusions about potency that I don't think have even been proven yet.
It
Like,
does, dude. It does seem that a lot of the science, and especially with cannabis, again, I want to say, like, I'm always hearing that we need more science, right? But like these guys seem to have science for everything. They've got a study that they can cherry pick for every claim that they want to make. Some of the studies I've read, I read like I follow some of these groups online and I read some of the studies because I'm a physics nerd and I like to read science and I like to make sure people aren't lying to kids. And which is weird because I don't even fucking like kids that much. But
mhm,
someone needs to be honest. And I think that a lot of what I've seen from these, these 501c3 sort of angry parents groups is cherry pick statistics, more of the fear-based stuff. Like they never show studies that are pro cannabis in any light, really.
right,
It's
right.
all negative. And it's like, dude, there's gotta be some other stuff. Although to be fair, I want to say a lot of the studies that do get funded are negative studies because the ones trying to show positive effects have a hard time getting funding.
Right.
Um,
They just like I feel like they purposefully miss the mark. They start talking about all these health things and it's like, look, nobody's saying that using a drug is healthy. They're saying that we shouldn't be locked in jail for making a choice that only hurts ourselves, arguably. And they just completely miss the mark with it. So I'm sure there's somebody right now that's like, why are you giving so much airtime to these people? But I'm like, uh, I would say to them that you should lean into and listen to people that you disagree with more.
Yo,
Um,
I'm with you 100%. And I've had people tell me the same shit, man. Why would you even waste your time with that person? It's like, and as soon as I hear that, I'm like, yo, I'm gonna get them on. You know,
yeah,
those are the conversations you need. That we can do this bubble shit all day, where I have my friends on and we all agree on everything and we jerk each other off. But that's not
right.
gonna really push the conversation forward, if you ask me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And by listening to them, when you encounter like listening to people you disagree with, when you encounter one of those actual people in public, like you're not awestruck when something fucking stupid flies out of their mouth. Cause sometimes like I'll watch like some channel maybe that I don't agree with, or just some person that I don't agree with. I'll like listen to them and I'll hear it and I'll be like, oh my God, like if they would have hit me with this like, in the moment, it would have taken me like 20 seconds to think about it. And from their perspective, it maybe would have been like a gotcha. But it's like, no, you just said something fucking stupid, like that has no. So one of the things that they'll say is like, people say we need to treat marijuana like alcohol. Well, that's like saying my headlight's out, so I'm gonna bash my taillight out. Jordan Davidson said that on my show. His friend or colleague, whatever you want to call, like it's a colleague, I think, because it's a coworker at Sam. His name's Luke. He went on Laura Ingraham, some crazy bitch on Fox, and he said the same exact analogy, and I'm like, what? When is your head like? It just is a weird thing. It's like, no, we're talking about locking people up in jail. Nobody's suggesting that, like that more people should use cannabis or anything else.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that those
That seemed
companies
like a
don't push
non
for that.
sequitur kind of argument. Like, what?
Yeah, it's just ridiculous. So I guess just to maybe put a cap on this particular I mean, if you have more questions, don't hesitate,
No, dude,
obviously,
don't worry. I got a
but
bunch of questions.
like one of the things I like that I asked Jordan in a show that I did with just him is like, did I tell you anything today that you kind of thought I had a point on? And one of the things he said I had a point on was like, he was saying that when you legalize cannabis, that all of a sudden parents are going to be leaving out edibles and the
Uh,
kids are going to eat the edibles. And I
and the
said, look,
access will spike.
right. And I said,
Okay,
look,
I've
that
heard
may
that.
be the case, but that's a case of responsible parenting. And the parent, look, we've got a lot of things that people can buy, bleach, different hair chemicals,
Bleach
you
will kill
name
you
it.
faster than fucking cannabis will.
Right. And we're trusted as adults to put that in a responsible place away from our kids. And so we should do the same thing with edibles. And I said, besides that, though, Jordan, cannabis has been illegal for years. And guess what I've been doing? Making my own edibles. Still, though, it's not like just because cannabis becomes legal that all of a sudden edibles appear. Like edibles have been a staple of the cannabis community for years and years. And guess what? We've all been responsible in not having our kids or
Hey,
pets for the most part. I mean, people make mistakes,
and I'm going to
but
tell you right now, dude, I've been irresponsible sometimes and eaten too many edibles. And guess what? Like, it's fine. I feel anxious and kind of scared for a minute, and then it goes away. Like,
yeah,
and as an adult, like, yeah, I agree. I think those are choices we should be allowed to make. You could buy enough alcohol to kill yourself right now at any fucking store that sells alcohol. So I don't understand if people aren't dying from weed overdoses. Like that argument to me just kind of, it's like, why are we even talking about this?
yeah. Well, and we're allowed to engage in risky behavior in so many different ways. I have to make sure I give credit where credit is due. I think Hamilton Morris came up with the analogy that I'm about to use. Like we're allowed to skydive, like I mentioned earlier. We're allowed
Sure.
to buy bleach. We're about to buy
Guns.
tannerite, guns. We shoot the guns at the tannerite and explode shit. Like we're allowed to do this in America, but then you're gonna try to say we can't, make a decision that's even probably safer than that. Or it doesn't even really matter when it comes down to safety. It's just
You're
like
right.
I made this choice because again, safety is not the point at all. We're allowed to do things that are risky. We're allowed to parachute, ride motorcycles, you
Freedom.
know, freedom, baby. And like if you
America.
get hurt, look, you can abuse anything.
Sure.
You can abuse anything. You can eat too much junk food. You could abuse gravity by not pulling your parachute when you go
You could,
parachuting.
you could die from drinking too much water.
You can die from drinking too much water. You can abuse anything, and people abuse cannabis. I abuse cannabis. I have had to reevaluate my relationship with cannabis a few times. And if somebody's listening right now and they have been feeling that way, there's a really good community on Reddit that I want to give a plug to. It's called Petioles, which I believe is like some language for leaves. So Petioles. And what I like about the community is that they really put an embrace on responsible cannabis use. They don't say you can't use cannabis, just use it responsibly. And some people don't use it responsibly. Some people have a problem with it, and that
Sure.
can happen with anything. And we shouldn't criminalize them. We should give them help. We should give them communities, and that's why I like places like that. So yeah, thanks for asking me about that. That's a really big thing that I would love it if people check that out. Episode 226 is the one with Jordan and Justin. Episode 205 just has Jordan, and episode 179 also has just Jordan.
Look at you, Rain
So
Manning, all these episodes. You're like, yeah, 176, 204. Yeah, good
well,
recall there, man.
I had two of them written down, but I was like, what was the other one? So I might be
Okay.
wrong on the last one, but you'll find it if you look it up.
Okay.
So
Cool. I'd like to transition a little, man, and ask you about Curaleaf
oh
because
yeah.
right before this, I blasted through your two episodes about Curaleaf. Um, And I've also been doing my own. I don't know if you saw the video of the pre rolls I posted way back when, where they were using labeling from multiple states on their packaging. Anyway, you got my attention with the Curaleaf stuff, and you had, I guess you put a post. So I don't want to. I paraphrased a little here.
Sure.
You'd released a post about how Curaleaf and Cresco and GTI and some of these big MSOs have lobbied against home grow, as you mentioned earlier, and you closed by saying, people who sell cannabis are preventing you from growing your own.
Hmm.
And you also mentioned that you're seeing MSOs lobbying with police unions, I
Hmm.
believe. Is
Yep.
that accurate?
Absolutely. I've got reporting from the Chicago Tribune that can back that up. I believe man, I'll have to try to get you the headline afterwards. I know that we covered it in episode number 232 of our podcast, though. I can tell you that right now, and that has citations. In fact, with that episode, I produced an entire document which has citations for everything we covered in the episode. And
Can I get that document?
oh, absolutely. And anybody can actually. It's in the description of the episode for episode 232. You download it absolutely free. And in fact, we're updating that document because we only went to day one of adult use sales, which was 3 years ago. So we still have to we went from 1979 to day one of adult use sales, which is January 1st, 2020 in Illinois. And so what we still have to cover is what has happened afterwards, which is just, I mean, I was just talking to Cannabis Legalization News the other day about some of the connections that have been pointed out and reported by the new or regarding the new licensees. There's like a lot of connections. I guess the clearest one I can give you, I really shouldn't be going off the top of my head on this stuff. I apologize, but this is another thing that we cover in episode number 232. Like there's a new dispensary that opened up. It's called the Green Rose, and one of the people that are associated with the license literally worked for IDFPR, which issued the license. Right? They worked for the state of Illinois, and a lot of the other people on the license are like, there's like a former Chicago public official. There's ties to existing cultivators, and it's like, oh, these are supposed to be social equity dispensaries. Why do
Really?
they have ties to? Is that what social equity is?
What is
Ties.
IDFPR, please?
Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation.
Okay.
They are in charge of retail licensing in the state of Illinois, as well as like kind of like the rules behind how everything works. Yeah, they're kind of one of the regulatory bodies behind cannabis.
Got you.
One
Sorry to
of the
interrupt you
huge
there. Yeah.
no, it's all good. It's good that you asked me that. There's so many different departments involved in cannabis regulation right now. So there's IDFPR, which, financial and professional regulation. There's the Illinois Department of Public Health. There's the Illinois Department of Agriculture. The Illinois State Police, of course, are involved.
Of course. Yeah.
I'm probably missing a few,
And what
JCAR,
and what? There's a control board, I assume.
there is a cannabis regulation oversight office, which I interviewed the former cannabis regulation oversight officer. Her name is Danielle Perry. If people want to check out that episode, it's a awesome episode. I don't know that anybody else did an interview like that with her. And by that, I mean, she sat down with me for like 2 hours and I asked her a lot of different questions. And
I had the chairman of the board in Vermont for an hour. It was awesome. I've actually had the whole board on. So
yeah,
that was cool. Yeah, yeah.
see, that's legit, dude. That's legit as fuck. Get people like that on, and I'm hoping. So she's, like I said, she's the former regulator. I'm hoping to get the newly appointed on in the future. But anyways, I don't know how we got to the point of corruption, but I wanted to make sure that I clearly listed the Green Rose so that people can look into that, because if you look that up, you will find stories. The Chicago Tribune did a story. Just look up, Green Rose connections to, Chicago Tribune. And I mean, Caleb, I can send you the link afterwards if that would be more helpful.
I'd love
You can
to.
throw it
Yeah.
in the
Yeah,
description.
please
Cool.
do. And I believe you said, and something that I certainly agree with, is that this is sort of antithetical to the entire legalization movement here. To have police and these big corporations involved. I believe, again, that might be a little out of context, but I believe you said something to that effect.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, trying to we're talking about the home
This was the
grow
same
and
from
the
the Curaleaf.
Curaleaf thing.
Yeah, I took some
Yeah.
notes from your Curaleaf episodes here.
Well, yeah, I would say that yeah, it's antithetical for license holders to lobby alongside police, like hand in hand, and that is something that's been reported. Both opposed home grow, so that's where I was coming from with that. And I'll try to get you the Chicago Tribune link on that. But yeah, I would say that if like somebody like Tommy Chong, like and by the way, I've had him on the show. Super
I know
cool,
he's on the
cool
list
dude.
here. Yeah.
Yeah. If I would have asked him like, hey, would you ever have partnered with the police to do like to lobby against a cannabis user's right to do something, he'd be like, fuck no, man, and he'd say it exactly. You know what I mean? That's what I
Those
meant by
guys don't
that.
seem like they fuck with the police that much.
Yeah, and I'm not saying like we can't have some sort of a relationship, but when it comes to lobbying against a citizen thing, especially when it's like you're a cannabis company and you're cultivating cannabis. You know what goes into this, and an everyday person can handle this. It's just a fucking so because law enforcement was saying a lot of wild shit about home grow. It's gonna cause diversion stuff. It was this big concern from both law enforcement and the licensed cult. And to me,
Diversion, like to the black market or something in that sense.
right,
Okay,
right, yeah,
carry on.
yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you there. I'm super curious to hear what they were saying in Illinois.
No, I mean that's basically it. Yeah, that we would become this like source for the United States. I'm glad you asked for the clarification on that because, like, yeah, they were that would have been the case, and I don't know. That's ridiculous. Here's my thing with that. Davidson says the same shit, right? He says that if you want people to grow, then they're going to start. You look at what happened in Colorado. The cartel buys a bunch of houses and they start growing and they start pumping it out to the rest of the United States. And I'm like, yeah, you know why? Because there's a demand. And guess what they're doing? Supplying it. If it was legal, I mean, you wouldn't have to hide under the cover of legality in some random ass state
Also,
if it
don't the
was
cartel
legal everywhere.
already have houses where they're selling drugs out of right now?
I'm sure. I mean, I'm sure, but
I
but
know that they do.
uh
It doesn't seem like yeah, that seems like a bogus
but
argument to me.
the reason they can even do that though is because we've made these drugs illegal. Like, otherwise it would be that we're getting it from a license, like a trustable source, and competition would see to that who that would end up being, right? Because people demand a clean product, they demand a potent product, and there's a demand for something like that. Somebody will supply it. But if you force people into the shadows, like that's where it gets fucking, with all these things, we've found that prohibition doesn't work. You
Yeah.
can't prohibit alcohol. You can't, prohibit people to get abortions because then they're going to get back alley abortions. Like you can't, the only thing happening when you're doing something like that is like oversight. You're pushing it into a back alley. And I hate to use that, but as the term, but you're pushing it into the dark, I guess.
That's how I feel. Honestly, I'm right there with you, man. It's we've used this same argument for guns. If we outlaw guns, then only outlaws will have guns or whatever the fucking stupid catchphrase is. It's like, okay, does that
Mm-hmm.
not apply to fucking any other commodity
Mm-hmm.
or product on the market, especially illicit products that, you know, um, that's
Yeah.
like seems like a hypocrisy that has always kind of fucked my head up.
Yeah. I just it's crazy, and when you have, I know this might seem unrelated, but when you have prominent celebrities dying of, where they're trying to do cocaine, but there's fentanyl in their cocaine, it's like, okay, if I'm rich as fuck and I can't even get my hands on good drugs, like what state is the world in? And it's like, I'm not, look, I would
Great
rather
point.
somebody fuck their life up on cocaine than die from fentanyl laced cocaine.
Mhm.
Like, are you serious? Like, I would rather them, I don't know. I feel like that's a pretty simple point to rest my hat on.
That's a
You
great
know,
argument. I'm with you.
people should have the ability to abuse things if they want to. So, and
Mm.
if they do, we could learn from them. That's kind of like the thing I wanted to say to smart approaches to marijuana, or anybody that opposes these things. Like, okay, if you allow them, your data set of telling people why not to engage in those behaviors vastly expands, because then you have more to point to.
Right.
Like, these things work in your behavior. If you're
Mm.
actually trying to convince people to not do things, let everybody do them and
You
then
know,
learn from it, you
it's
know?
kind of funny you mentioned that, because part of something that I've been speculating is that if they allow their data sets to increase, what they're going to find is that they're wrong about a lot of shit, which is maybe why they don't allow the data
True.
set to
That's a good
increase.
point. That's a good
So,
point. When
so
the
it's
sky
interesting
doesn't
that you,
fall.
yeah, well, it's interesting you mentioned that, because I feel like there's a lot of shit they're not telling people because they know it would undermine their own whole fucking argument, and then they wouldn't get funding for their nonprofits, and they might have to
Yeah,
find a real job or something. But
good
that's
point.
pure speculation on my part.
Yeah. Hey, I dig it.
Can we go back to the Curaleaf thing here, man? I want to add,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
it sounds like they responded to you a little bit,
Here's what I always say.
or
Somebody
someone, yeah,
who claimed to represent Cureleaf, because it's a Reddit account. But look, I'm pretty sure, and the comment is still up to this day. If you could maybe please post post the link. I'd love for people to look at what we're talking about, like in your description, so that they can see it themselves. I
sure,
can get you a link if you need it. But anyways, yeah,
please.
they kind of replied to me when I made that post. I said, just a reminder, most of the licensed cultivators in the state of Illinois lobbied alongside police unions. If people want to read about that specifically, we have citations for the state of Illinois, but you can also look at like New York. They wrote about the fallacy of homegrown. If you Google the fallacy of homegrown cannabis, you can find this big report that the New York Medical Cannabis Industry Association made, which is comprised of basically all the same licensed operators
Oh
in the
yeah, they
state
were
of
on my
Illinois.
list too. Yeah, you said the board for them included some members from MSOs.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And some have since dissolved that. And it's funny because they'll say that to me. They're like, oh, I'm no longer a part of that group. And I'm like, yeah, but you were, and you still haven't taken a stance for home grow. So
You
like
got the
you're
work done,
right.
right?
You got your bag. Exactly, Caleb. Exactly. Um, so back to the Curaleaf thing. I mean, yeah, somebody who claimed to represent it. I wish I had this statement in front of me, what exactly they said, because it's just so fucking ridiculous.
It said they don't. This is, and I'm going to paraphrase here because I didn't have time to do the whole translation, but it said
I actually have it
they don't.
right here.
Oh, do you? Okay, cool. I'm
Yeah.
going to let you do it then.
So they said, to be clear, Curaleaf does not support banning home grow. They support legislation that limits the number of plants which can be grown for personal consumption. We believe statutes and regulations limiting the capacity for homegrown cannabis will protect consumers from unregulated and untested products entering the commercialized market, because we believe an unregulated supply chain could be harmful to consumers. We believe that the safest way for the cannabis industry to evolve is through a highly regulated marketplace that ensures products adhere to appropriate testing and consumer safety standards and is sold responsibly to adults 21 years of age or older.
Mhm.
And so let's just take this line by line, right? They say, we
Yeah, please do,
believe,
because I have a couple of follow-ups in here. Go ahead, please.
sure. They say, we believe statutes and regulations limiting the capacity for homegrown cannabis will protect consumers from unregulated and untested products entering the commercialized market,
Right.
right? And my thing is, they literally just said it themselves. The company supports legislation that limits the number of plants for personal
Right,
consumption.
right.
So
And
they're
so
twisting.
not only are you limiting what home growers and maybe medical patients can grow, but you're also kind of conflating this idea that those products might somehow enter the commercial market.
Yeah, and they know that that's not how seed to sale works. You can't just, it's not like, okay, I've got some homegrown right here, Caleb. I can't just take this to the dispensary and put it into a jar
Right.
and them sell it. The cops will call them out on that quicker than yeah, you can't do
Right.
that. They
Which
know that more than anybody.
that argument was total bullshit. When I heard it, it's just like, dude, and I get it. It's, to me, well, it seems like a blatant and deliberate effort to just cow more people into their medical dispensaries.
Yeah.
Um,
In other words, to your point, regulating a commercialized supply chain and allowing people to cultivate cannabis for personal use are not mutually exclusive ideas.
Right.
They can both exist at the same time.
Yeah, I had that one in quotes for sure, because that was a great point I thought you made there.
Yeah. And then so they, another bullshit line they threw in there was we believe, that the industry should evolve through a highly regulated marketplace that ensures products adhere to appropriate testing and consumer safety standards and assault, blah, blah, blah. And I'm just like, I don't think that anybody that wants to grow their own cannabis is advocating against products that adhere to appropriate testing and consumer safety standards.
I certainly haven't heard any of that. I also don't personally, I also don't think that the testing is super accurate if you look around the country. So
we should definitely talk about that.
It's on the list.
Here's the thing. Like I just said, I think a highly regulated marketplace can exist alongside home grow. See home brewing. Home brewing is increasing in popularity, and we aren't seeing an increase of unregulated products getting into the hands of minors or legal consumers. Sure, there are some limits to home brewing, but they're not nearly as restrictive as the home grow regulations that they support, which is like 5 plants.
Well, I'm in homebrew country right here in Vermont, so I've certainly been listening to a lot of those arguments, and that's another one I'm with you on.
Yeah, I'm curious, just really quick, because how does that work in Vermont? At least I know it's different maybe across the country, but I've heard that some places, like your limit that you can brew, because that's the thing, they say they support limits. Okay, there are limits with home brewing, but I've heard the limits with home brewing are very liberal, let's just say.
I actually don't know the answer to that in Vermont, but I will find out for you for sure.
Please,
I think it depends on the number of employees you have, but don't quote me on that. But I will find out for sure.
Yeah, and here's what I've heard is that the limits apply per spirit, which is super interesting because it's like, okay, well, if we want to be consistent, would that apply per strain? Like, I don't know. I'm just
weird. Okay,
spitballing here. I'm just totally spitballing, to be honest.
Yeah, no, that's what's funny is that we're already seeing consolidation in the craft brew industry as well. Those same companies, Anheuser-Busch bought out Magic Hat, like those same companies are still coming for the weed industry. And then what happens, or the craft brewing industry as well? Like, then what happens after that? Are we just going to see I don't know, Ben and Jerry's sold out as well. Now they got Unilever making their ice cream with GMO corn and pesticides and shit. It's like they still got the same package, but what's inside now after that happens, is what I'm concerned about.
That's a brilliant point. Yeah.
Well, shit. Thanks.
But yeah, no, I mean, I didn't even think about it. I didn't even think about the fact that that's, because Illinois actually has a pretty vibrant, not home brewing, I would say. I mean, I know a few home brewers, but craft breweries, where somebody starts their own little industrious thing, and I believe that's a pretty new thing. And so, to your point, as it gets popular, these big companies could, and it sounds like they have started to swallow up people. That's sad to hear. But I kind of wrapped up my statement to Curaleaf by just saying, of course we should regulate the cultivation and sale of cannabis, but that's not what we're talking about. Which brings me back to my original question. How are you correlating home grow for personal use with an unregulated supply chain for commercial use? These seem like separate issues, but maybe I'm missing something. Never heard back from them. I've revisited the topic several times. It's a great question too. I understand why you didn't hear back from.
Yeah. How do you answer that question without fucking lying? I mean, it's a good question. These things are not mutually exclusive or whatever, and you nailed it. And I find usually the silence can be more telling than some of the answers that I've received.
I think it's funny because if you look at that, I really want people to look up this interaction because I post about it still, and they've got this they've got their Curaleaf. It's CLUS admin. That's the user on Reddit. It's been created for 2 years. They've posted 3 times. They responded saying something was inaccurate on some thread in a weed stocks subreddit. Then they posted in a Vegas tree saying, we're sorry you had an issue with a product to assist you. They're kind of giving them, please email us here. And then their last comment was the comment to me. They've not used that Reddit account since. I wonder why.
I actually got them to respond to this Twitter thread that my friend posted when I posted a reel on Instagram of the labeling that I thought was questionable. They had they have Vermont labeling and Maine medical labeling.
I'm curious what they say
the
about
same
that.
pack. I'll show you after. But I posted the video. I didn't make any accusations. I just unpeeled the sticker. I showed both states' packaging on it, and I fucking put it out there. And he posted it to him, and somehow got one of their executives to respond on Twitter. And they said, "Hey, all our packaging follows the Vermont state, regulations and blah blah blah." I'm like, "Well, regulations is cool, but like, what about the statutes? Like, let's look at the statutes because the laws are different than the regulations, and this seems kind of misleading. Like, not to say
whatever Vermont's legislation is, if it's coming from another state, that's like,
well, that's what I'm saying. It's at the very least misleading, and I don't like to make accusations because I don't have any facts that could prove any of this. But they could easily put a Maine joint in that packaging and send it to Vermont. We're fucking right next door.
Right.
That could easily be done. But or they could, either way, I think it's misleading. Like, people want to know where their weed's coming from. If you got stickers on there from 2 different states, I think that's misleading.
Fair enough. Yeah, I guess
that was the first and only thing I got them to respond to. So I was, it seems like they only take complaints.
I think they responded because they were worried about accusations of interstate trafficking, because that's like a big thing that you still cannot do.
Which I wouldn't make, because I don't have anything that would even remotely substantiate that kind of claim, which is
sure. Yeah.
Which I also appreciate about your work. You've been very careful to also be clear about things like that. And it's something that I certainly took note of.
Thank you. Yeah. I was just going to say that, some people I think they've pointed out maybe something like that in Illinois, and the way the company explained it was like, and it made sense to me, like they buy all this packaging from one company, but then they slap stickers on it.
Right.
But I don't know. Like, I would love to talk to you about that, because that sounds interesting. But anyway,
that's kind of the story I got from them. Yeah.
Oh, gotcha.
Which is fine, but like, that does seem a little misleading either way.
Absolutely.
I see 2 different states on here, and that is a Vermont statute. It's not a regulation. That is a law,
Right.
So the way they word their response, it's always very careful and very legal. We comply with all of the state regulations. And I went in there, I said, well, what about the Vermont statutes? And I took a screenshot of the statute on, whatever, misleading advertising or whatever. It's consumer protection stuff. And I didn't get a response on that. Yeah. I thought it was a legit question.
Yeah, no, it is. It is a legit question.
And especially now we see these stories just coming back in the news about the ties to, some Russian oligarchs through Curaleaf, which I think everybody kind of already knew about that pays attention to this shit. But now it seems like they've got some more concrete evidence.
Dude, if you could get this person on the show, I haven't been able to get him on, but there's this person, he's an investor. So, I know some people don't like investors, but I remember months ago when the whole Ukraine thing really hit the fan. And I say months ago, maybe it's been a year now.
It was like February or March. Like, I remember.
Yeah. So I remember that's kind of when one of the first big stories came out, but I really he was the first person I really saw pushing that question. I don't want to say narrative necessarily, but he was immediately called like xenophobic and blah blah blah, because just attributing everything to Russia is basically what they were saying. And he had public interactions on Twitter with Boris Jordan, and he's since brought those tweets back up, and he's like, hey, you called me this, you called me that, what's going on now? And I would love to talk to that guy, because he never apologized for the questions he asked. He felt like he's, and time has shown that he seems like he was on the right angle. At least that's from my outside perspective, without having done a lot of research. I don't really know what's going on with that whole thing, but it sounds pretty fucking crazy, is what I'll say.
Cool. Well, I mean, I've been trying to track that for a long time, and I see it just has come back in the news recently. And
if I didn't say the name, for folks that want to look it up and try to, put proof to the pudding, it's Betting Bruiser on Twitter. I'm telling you, he was calling this shit like And Boris Jordan was tweeting him. Boris is from Curaleaf. He's like the big spokesperson from Curaleaf. And he's like, no, 100%
Boris was a
wrong.
co-founder, right? Or something
Something
like
like
that.
that. Yeah, he's got
Yeah.
like, yeah.
He's not the
Yeah.
CEO, but he's like the co-founder, I believe.
His background, I mean, if you just Google him, like, yeah, it definitely seems like they're a Russian company because it says something about like he was from the Soviet Union and founded this company called Sputnik something. And I'm like, that all sounds Russian. But anyways, again, I don't know a lot about it, so folks should do their own research.
Hmm.
Don't
And it did
just from
seem
an
like he had
outsider's
some
perspective.
connections.
It's
From what I've read about him, it seemed like he had some connections with some Russian bankers as well.
yes,
And,
that's
and
what
it
I
seems
yeah.
very strange because I thought we had sanctions on Russia as part of this whole deal. And then you find out they're pouring fucking hundreds of millions of dollars into the weed industry. It's like, hey, what's going on there?
Right. Somebody said it the other day. They're like, you find out that America's biggest weed company, because that's what Curaleaf is. They are America's biggest weed company, is bankrolled by Russia, allegedly.
Yeah,
So,
allegedly. Yeah, we'll wait for all the facts to come out
yeah, definitely
if
seems that
that
way,
ever
though.
happens. If that ever happens.
Right.
Cool. Well, and also another thing I noticed was that Cureleaf, aside from that shit, has just had a long track record of lawsuits here from mislabeling their packaging, falsifying potency results, using
Mhm.
unapproved additives in their vape cartridges. Um, it just seems like some of these MSOs, man, like forgot A, that people like smoking good weed, and B, they should hire some people that could grow that, or, you know.
Yeah. I actually take a kind of a middle ground stance on this. Look, they are bad. And like you say, their track record's not good. But I truly believe that if you asked any of those people, Boris or the head of GTI or the head of Cresco, like, do you guys think you grow weed? Do you want to grow good weed? They may answer the first question, maybe, but the question, do you want to grow weed? Do you want to have a good product? They would all say yes. I don't think they like, and I don't think that's what you're saying either. But just, I'm trying to be middle ground. Here's what I think the issue is. Like, I think they all want to be the best weed companies. Like, I don't think that they're in it. Like, I mean, of course they're in it for money, but like they still do want to last the test of time. With all that said, I think the issue that you're noticing and that everybody's noticing is that they're applying industrial farming techniques to a product that is really has always been a boutique craft
Hmm.
product.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what do you I'm just
I
curious. What
agree
do you
with you, dude. I think what they're trying to scale it up to Walmart, and
right.
because the way that these guys make money, it seems like, is by volume.
Well, and think
Um,
about how like is it Marlboro? There's a certain cigarette company where they're like you will never pick up I mean I don't know which company it is, but I'm just going to pick Marlboro. They're
I
like you will
think
never
Philip
pick up a
Morris is Marlboro, but I don't remember. But go
whatever
ahead.
brand it is, they're basically saying you will never pick up one of their cigarettes and it will like it's always going to taste the same. It's always going to feel the same. And I think I would like to, I mean, I feel like all these companies market themselves as CPG, consumer packaged goods.
Yeah.
They, and I just don't think cannabis is. I think it's an agricultural craft product that, you think about when you go to the produce section. I always use this analogy. Like sometimes I go and I look at the grapes and I'll like feel them. I'll sneak one and pop one in my mouth, right? And some days they're not good. Some days they're not good. And I'm like, you know what? Not getting grapes today. Or at least I'm not getting grapes from here. They don't got good grapes. So, or whatever produce I'm looking at. I believe cannabis is that way. And I'm sure there are certain products in cannabis that can be CPG, edibles, for example,
True.
tonics, candy
True.
bars, whatever. But I think the flower that you and I are smoking on right now, you have to look at it, smell it, maybe touch it. I don't know,
That does bother
whatever
me. In
floats your
some
boat.
dispensaries, you can't even look at it or get a whiff of it. Like
Right,
that's, or
right,
when you're getting delivery, you don't really. I've had some delivery medical patients tell me they've ordered some shit off the website that's just like a stock photo, and then what they've gotten at home is not even close to what that looked like. Which is
right.
like I'm not buying any weed that I can't look at and smell first.
And I truly believe that yeah, it sounds like we're on the same page that cannabis is not CPG. It's
Yeah,
it's a agricultural product that you have to be able to see and smell. And
yeah,
I
and
mean, look, if
honestly,
it doesn't make a difference to you, I guess there's a market for that. Somebody that buys canned weed doesn't really fucking care. Just throw it in the grinder, roll it up. There are people like that, whatever. But some of us like fine wine, some of us like whiskey, and I think that's kind of where you're coming from
Sure.
with
Yeah. And
cannabis.
you know, like I have friends like that I know how they grow their weed. I go visit their gardens constantly all summer. I check this shit. Like we're homies. And if they set up at a farmer's market, I wouldn't be worried about, oh, I need fucking pesticide testing. I already know he's not using pesticides. So
Right.
I don't personally, I understand that in a retail level, at a retail dispensary, sure. You know, the average consumer probably wants that, but I know my
Yeah.
grower and I wouldn't mind just going to a farmer's market with my jar. I could bring my jar that I could just fill up with weed every time. And then we don't need to waste all this packaging. And then the farmers don't have to waste all this money with labeling and bullshit that they don't like. Farmers grow weed. That's what they do. They don't like a lot of
Yeah.
them don't want to be concerned with all that wasteful packaging and the labeling. And I'm with them on that one.
Yeah.
I'd love to see
Absolutely.
direct to consumer sales, like on a small scale. I think you actually made some comments that there is a scale where you know that testing and safety requirements do become an issue, which I agreed with strongly. But I think on a small scale, it's just like growing to the grocery store. Like if you see a
Yeah.
moldy tomato, you just don't buy it, and that guy doesn't make any money off the tomatoes that day. So,
Yep. Absolutely.
hmm,
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think that at a certain level you need some regulation, I suppose, but I think that individuals should still be allowed to purchase. Look how we're treating CBD right now. Like all the only thing that is required, if you, I might be wrong on this, but from what I understand, like you can basically just sell CBD as long as it isn't over 0.03 THC. Like
point
no other
three,
testing is required.
0.3, I believe.
Oh yeah, zero.
Yeah,
I think it's actually 0.03. It's like, or maybe it is 0.3, whatever it is. I believe that's the only thing. It's not like they're like, it shouldn't have heavy
yeah,
metals in it. That's why I always tell
yeah.
people, if you are going to buy CBD, make sure to ask for a COA, or know your farmer, you know,
Sure. It is important to
um,
know that because from what I understand, that what I've learned in the last year is that cannabis plants are really good at concentrating heavy metals and things like that, and
yeah,
soaking them out of the soil. So if you live somewhere where they used to have like an apple orchard or something, where they had like I don't know what's in the apple seeds. There's some kind of cyanide or something in an apple seed. So if you lived in certain places, you have to have extra testing done. And I get that stuff. Like I don't want to be smoking heavy metals and shit.
yeah, yeah. So I think that all that should definitely be a thing. But to your point that you kind of brought up earlier about these companies is like all the things that we were just talking about, like the farmer's market field, knowing your farmer, all of that shit. I think they're against all of those ideas. They want everybody to become a part of the regulated market, which it sounds like we both agree doesn't seem necessary. But I just wanted to say that I think that's why they get a lot of flack too, because they kind of are against the wave with regard to the culture. Like you and I both, I mean, we don't even really know each other. Like we've talked a few times leading up to this interview, but we, being cannabis smokers, we agree that like the culture is knowing your farmer and
Yeah.
having these farmers market options. And yeah, if you want the regulated option with tests, go get it, buddy. But if you don't, and you trust your guy, go ahead.
Yeah, right.
And
Like I don't need it.
yeah, I think they're totally against things like that. And it's not for any sinister reason other than the accepted value of cannabis will fall, and they could not charge what they charge, you know.
Well, that was my point is that they make money off of volume, I think, because they don't produce a super quality product. Like you were saying, this is a craft sort of boutique market. If
Mhm.
you're selling Walmart weed out here in a craft boutique market, you might have some trouble, like especially if you've gone ahead and built a massive cultivation facility or, just gone immediately vertical in an industry where you don't really even know how to produce the product that you're trying to bring to market. If that
Yeah.
makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely it does. And I guess to like pitch it in a slightly different light, like it's interesting how all states approach this, right? I don't mean to say all states, but at least states that started with limited markets. It's pretty consistent. Florida, Illinois, New York, Ohio, trying to think of a few others that really started limited. Um, they start with, okay, we accept that cannabis is safe and is accepted as medicine, but only a few people should be allowed to grow it.
Yeah, right.
Because it's still so crazy that, y'all are too stupid to grow it yourself. We will have a few licenses, and I'm just,
No,
this
I
is all
heard a lot of that in
conjecture.
Vermont too, and it was disgusting to hear, especially after our medical dispensaries were selling people fucking moldy ounces of garbage weed
Yeah.
for $400.
So then you fast forward to when a state like that transitions into adult use, and it's like, okay, we all agree that weed should be entirely legal, not even just medicine. It should be entirely legal. And they always make this pitch like everybody should have a chance to participate in the industry. Social equity, that's become a big talking point. But then you see things where it's like, no, we're still going to limit the licenses,
Yeah,
right?
or
We're
like
not going to have
I've seen lottery systems. Like
license lotteries, all that stuff. Oh yeah, Massachusetts is another one because they did the whole thing with license lotteries, and there was a
that was
big,
fucking ridiculous.
yeah. So you know, I guess what I'm just trying to say is that I've talked to people that have won licenses in Illinois, right? And if people aren't familiar with what happened in Illinois, check out episode number 232 of our podcast to kind of get a foundational understanding, and then stay tuned for part 2 of that episode where we will break it down. But we kind of pitched it as a system of social equity, and we're going to give people that were disadvantaged a chance to participate in the market. Yet we've seen most licensees are connected, right? I mentioned earlier that one that's connected to IDFPR, all of that stuff. And so the question has become, like, with these license limitations, what is social equity? Because I thought social equity was that everybody should be able to get in. And it turns out that Illinois' definition of social equity means that you limit the number of licenses so that the product can be the value of the product can be artificially inflated, and the value of the license can be artificially inflated.
Hmm.
And apparently that's the definition of social equity. So these few people that won their golden ticket can start to build intergenerational wealth by either charging outrageously high prices on weed or by selling off their license to some other company. And I have to wonder, because I've interviewed like the head regulator of Oregon, who did a completely opposite, that state did a
No shit.
completely opposite thing of what Illinois did. Yeah, that's a great interview. You should check it out, because we really contrast what Illinois did with Oregon. And Oregon, just to get into it, like Oregon did a completely open market, super low licensing fees. Anybody could get in, anybody could have a chance. But what that meant was a lot of people failed, right? But I would and this is his point. He said, because everybody's like, Oregon had too much weed. A lot of businesses went out of business. And he's like, look, I would rather somebody have had the chance to get into business and fail than not have a chance. And it's interesting because I showed him a clip from a regulator in Illinois who said,
What's his name? Do you remember?
Steve Marks. Yep. And he was on Vice back in the day. And that's kind of why I got inspired because they asked him, what do you think about this? And that's exactly what he said. I would rather have people have the chance to get in the market and grow weed and sell weed than limit them artificially through the government picking and choosing winners.
Sure. That's the sentiment I certainly agree with.
Yeah. And I showed him a quote that one of our regulators said, which is that 5,000 people applied for what would be 75 licenses. The state knew that 99% of people weren't going to win. And I'm just like, so that's our metric for success. Like, I'm not saying she said that like she was proud of it, but she said it very matter of factly. But it's just like, when you look back at it all, it's definitely different than what a lot of people had in mind. And that's where reading the fine print comes in handy, because some people were ringing the bells before, as I found out in my research.
Hey, wow, you're on
But
to what I'm doing here. Shit.
yeah, exactly. Right. Anyways, I digress. I mean, I just wanted to make the point that, some people have a little bit of a point when they talk about the sinister values of these companies. Like, they do seem to be antithetical to what was the original cannabis movement. And I asked Tommy Chong about this. I was like, when you thought about legalized weed, you were just thinking about like not having to worry about getting busted by the cops, right? You weren't like, well, there should also be stores with chocolate bars and vape pens and everything else. It's like, okay, yeah, sure, that's the next step, but really what they wanted was like not to go to jail
Is
anymore.
Tommy with me? Because that's all I wanted from legalization was for cops to leave me alone.
Yeah, that's basically
That's
what I recall him
literally all
saying.
I wanted. And we couldn't even get that because now they're training new drug recognition experts to pull you over.
Exactly, dude. They did the same fucking thing here. Yeah.
Really?
It's yeah. They try to say that they can tell if you're high, and um for a while they were trying to say they could run the dog around your car, and if the dog hit that you weren't transporting cannabis properly because it was supposed to be in an odor proof container. That shit went out with a court ruling, and hopefully that'll stick. But yeah, the cops have been really instrumental in some like scare tactics, misinformation, and it just makes you wonder, like, are you really here to for my safety, or are you just like coming up with different new ways and different ways to get me in trouble? Because that whole odor thing, I always like to say this, and maybe this is a good place to wrap. We can talk about sex and stuff like that if you had questions about that topic.
Send it,
I don't
buddy.
know. I
Go
just want to
ahead,
make
dude.
sure to plug. Wanted to make sure to plug that
Hell yeah.
project because I'm proud of it. But damn, I fucking brought that up and I forgot where I was going.
What were you talking about?
Cannabis companies are
Legalization and
antithetical.
sex? Were you not talking about legal prostitution too? Were you?
Well, if you were down for that, but I
Yeah,
can't.
absolutely.
Now that
No,
I brought that up,
no, we were
damn.
talking about giving cops new reasons to fuck with people because of
Thank you.
legalization.
Yeah, so things have gotten worse since we legalized cannabis.
In terms of arrests or
I can't say that matter of factly yet, but I can say that the way that officers are able to enforce it. So when so let me back up. Cannabis was decriminalized in Illinois before it was legalized. You could only have 10 grams, but there was no like vehicle code about it and odor proof container. And you could just have it in your pocket. And if you got caught with it, yes, it was a citation. But like now, if you that same situation, if I had a bag of weed in my front pocket and I get pulled over and they're like, "Hey, what's going on?" and they pat me down and pull this bag of weed out, I could get a class A misdemeanor, which is equal to domestic violence in Illinois.
for
And that's
10
after we
grams?
legalized it for improper transportation is what they call it.
Wow.
Now, fortunately, we've not had a lot of that, but there's definitely plenty of stories out there because it's like, people still don't go to the dispensary, so they'll have it in a sandwich baggie and they'll say that's improper transportation because it's not in a childproof container or something. Like and that's where you got to shut your mouth
Yeah.
and get an attorney, like,
That's my worst part is shutting my mouth.
yeah, same, dude, same. But
It's just wild. I don't have kids. I'm not taking this home to like feed it to my child. Like I don't have kids
right.
on purpose because I don't want it to be around me because I'm
And if the
kind of a
kids and
mess,
if the kids
Like,
were there, you would probably move it to a cabinet that was out of a
yeah,
kid's
right.
reach, right?
We would smoke
Yeah.
outside and we would fucking hide the shit. I would get a safe and I would put it in there and make sure they didn't get it because I don't want kid. I started smoking when I was 12, dude. That was probably too young, Like if I had a 12-year-old and I found out they were smoking weed, I'd be like, oh, that's a little early.
Yeah,
you know?
I feel you on that.
Hmm. What else we got? I had a couple more. I wanted to ask you about a little bit about the testing and the remediation because that's something else I heard you talk about. And I know you actually said you weren't really super well informed on remediation whenever this interview happened. But I was wondering if you've learned anything in the meantime. You were talking about irradiation, maybe. Um, and you said this wasn't your best topic, but I'm curious because I've also been reading a lot about this. Also, like the Myox type products, the peroxides. I had a woman in Massachusetts tell me they were using some kind of lemon juice solution, which I've never
Yeah.
heard. I'm curious where you're at on that, man.
So, I mean, we've done some interviews actually with companies that do remediation.
I got a couple coming on. One of them does X-rays, and one of them does the peroxide. So
Nice. Yeah. So I mean, I just wanted to start there because some people, when I've talked about it in the past, they've literally said that it's not even real. I'm like, it's real. There are companies that do it, and remediation is not something that's exclusive to the cannabis industry. There's a lot of foods in our everyday life that are remediated. I think meat is chief among them.
What'd you say? Spices, maybe?
Yeah,
Irradiation or of spices, maybe?
I think so. And you know, I've heard that I think in Canada they actually have requirements on which if a product is remediated, like especially via irradiation, because we'll get into the different methods that I'm at least aware of. But in Canada, just to really quickly wrap up that point, you actually are required to label certain products from what I understand. People should Google this, but and there's different regulations for different locations, but they actually have like a Radura symbol that you display on the product, you know, like the nuclear symbol,
Oh shit.
for if it's been irradiated.
Yeah.
Nuts, I think, are another thing that's commonly remediated,
Okay.
like peanuts and stuff like that. But so the different forms of remediation I'm aware of. So first of all, remediation is actually like pretty fucking common, and it's like pretty well in line with cannabis culture. Like it's not a super sinister practice, but it can get very sinister. And by that I mean, let's just start with a basic form of remediation that I'm aware of. Like you cultivate cannabis outside, and just as a matter of fact, sometimes some bugs get on it, right? So you bring it inside and you wash it off. Well, technically you're remediating it. I know that that's, you know, whatever. Some people will even argue with me that that is remediation, but it is, in my opinion. You know, when you're thinking about it, you're doing something to the product, you're washing it. You
Sure.
know,
Or people spray their
um,
outdoor at different times of year to deal with powdery mildew and stuff like that.
yeah, they're remediating an issue that came up, and you know, it's a product. I mean, it's a living product. It happens, right? But so what we're really talking about, I think, what you're talking about is like these forms of remediation that some companies often do before they even test their cannabis. Like they remediate and then they send the cannabis to be tested, thus ensuring they pass the test is the key there. So um, the different forms of remediation I'm aware of is like ozone remediation, which is like you put it in the product in a chamber and blast it with like some ozone gas.
Huh. Okay.
And we had a company on called Willow Industries. We actually had their CEO on, and when I went to Colorado, they let me come by and check out the facility. It was pretty cool to see the machinery. And I specifically asked if it was being used in Illinois, and it is, and I believe it still is to this day. They've recently kind of rebranded. I don't think they call themselves remediation anymore. They call themselves Kill Step. So I actually am going to be inviting them back on, and I'm like, are you just coming up with a new marketing I don't mean to spoil my interview, but I guess there it is for them if they're listening right now. Are you just rebranding, or like what's going on there? Because anyways, so there's ozone, and so trying to think, Willow Industry is the company that I was just thinking about. If you want to try to find my interview with Jill Ellsworth, check it
Okay.
out.
Cool.
For folks that are listening. But so there's ozone, there's irradiation, which it sounds like you run the weed through like a microwave, almost like an industrial X-ray machine.
Yeah, it's like X-rays. That's what I've heard.
Yeah, and it like kills any mold or mycotoxins or whatever. Now, I mean, you know, you can't remediate the things you mentioned earlier. Like if you've got heavy metals in the product or whatever, like that's where you're kind of just fucked.
Yeah.
But like a lot of people struggle with the end of the process. Like most people can grow weed and figure it out, but the end of the process when you actually package it up and get it together and make sure that it's not like too moist so that it's going to be moldy, like that's a real, you got to really understand the drying and curing process to get that right. And even when you get it
I'm
right,
amazed how many growers. Sorry to cut you off, but I'm amazed how
no,
many guys did not really do their homework on that. Like, hey, we figured
yeah.
out how to grow weed. We did all this shit. Oh, I didn't build a room to dry it in. Like,
It's crazy
what?
because that's like, you know, that's one of the things you learn being a home grower is like you could do everything right in the grow, but if you fuck up the dry, you've kind of, I mean, you can do things like put a bovida or boveda pack, however you say it, in the jar, and it'll like re-moisten it. But there's a certain extent where you, if you over dry it, like you lose just some flavor. And I'm not going to sit here and act like I'm an expert, but I've definitely over dried weed, and I've correctly dry weed. And it's like, there's, when I've over dried it, I'm like, well, fuck, man, I fucked that up, but here's the crazy thing though, is that I've smoked weed like that in the dispensary. And a lot of these companies I talk to, people won't go on the record, but some of the growers will complain that, especially these larger companies, they'll just be like, hey, cut the crop. I don't care if it's not ready to be harvested. Cut it all down. We need to get Skywalker OG in before the next Star Wars movie. Like something like that. And I'm not even like, that's a almost scary accurate rendition I just gave you. Like I'm kind of vaguely referencing something, but like this is like something that happens across many different companies. I'm sure anybody that works at companies will vouch for the fact that the head grower sometimes is not always listened to by the marketing team.
I can tell you that. I know a couple of them, and one of my buddies was called into one of the MSOs here to remediate their powdery mildew issues and mold. And when I asked him in the interview, I said, "What was your assessment when you came in?" And he said, "Fucking get rid of all of it. Like start over, clean the shit and start over." Right. And they said, what if,
right.
Yeah,
right.
We're not, that's, and I asked him, I said, well, what's the point of even hiring someone to come in as like an expert if you're not going to fucking listen to them? You could just hire some schlub and then not listen to them.
Yeah.
That was weird.
They just got to figure out how they can get anything out of it. It's interesting. I've been saying in Illinois, cannabis is a lossless product, and this is perhaps how it works in other states, but I can tell you for a fact that this is how it works in Illinois. If you fail a test, you can remediate that product and submit it as a concentrate. And as long as that concentrate passes, you're good. Yep. And I'm not saying anything's bad about that. I'm just saying that it is probably truly a lossless industry in that anything that doesn't look good or doesn't test good just gets thrown into edibles and vapes, baby. We ain't throwing money out the window.
You know what I think's bad about that is that it encourages these companies to not put any money into their cultivators.
Yeah.
They have no incentive to grow a better product now because they could just treat it with some chemical. That is what I think is the downside there. And that is the major complaint that I've heard about these MSOs is that they don't grow good weed. And it's like people that smoke weed like to smoke good weed. And I think maybe they've overlooked that a little. And we're treating a symptom here as opposed to the root cause of an issue. And I would just prefer, they have the money to hire the best growers in the world,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But I think it goes back to something we were talking about earlier where they're throwing industrial style farming techniques, and that's irradiation. I mean, I'm glad we got to this because irradiation is, look, we just talked about how it is a normal facet of our life. That's because everything else in our life is, industrial agriculture, right?
Sure.
Or an industrial process. So cannabis is becoming that. And naturally, here we are.
And which I hate. And I was worried about that the whole time. Like this would turn into some Monsanto shit.
Yeah. And, like there are people like Shalene Title that have proposals that like say like, okay, like to try to prevent those things. And I'm not saying anything about those proposals necessarily. I'm not smart enough to make heads or tails of them. I will say that I like the sound of her proposals. And one of them I'm specifically referencing is like open the market. Don't limit the issuance of licenses. However, you should limit the number of licenses one entity can own because you don't want one entity to become too large.
Well, that's here's the problem. Verticalization.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Go ahead.
But the problem with that, as you may know, with other things in America, is that it's all about shell game and like what is an entity? Who is a person, and like, like we get down to that legally. And that's, I asked an attorney straight up, I was like, look, I'm not saying he was dissing on Shalene, but he just basically said those proposals sound nice, but it becomes this cat and mouse game, with shell games. How are you going to prove the one entity thing? And I don't know. That's been an interesting question for me.
I asked the board about that when I interviewed them, and it's something I wondered about too, because it does sound like a good idea, right? You don't
sounds great.
Big corporations come in and take over. It's like, okay, but now that you've done the de-verticalization, now some rich guy could just give his friends a bunch of money, and now they can go out and acquire one of each license type, and
But
they
see
could
that
something like that. Is kind of how I was just like we were spitballing
Mhm.
ideas of how they would work around that kind of policy.
Yeah. Then this is why I actually like cannabis a lot, because what we're kind of saying is that what it's opening people up to is like, oh shit, this happens with everything else and every other facet in our life.
Mm-hmm.
And so cannabis is actually not a it's a gateway drug. It's a gateway drug to politics, in my opinion, if you actually are involved. You know what I'm saying?
It certainly sucked me in.
Yeah, and you start to wonder, like, and it goes back to what I started the show with, like, what are these rules? What are these like lines? And it, you start to really think about it, and it's just silly. And so, um, yeah, uh,
Mm-hmm.
but like I say, you maybe the issue is with regard to Shalene's proposals, right? If it becomes this cat and mouse game, like I said, that is an issue with everything else. You look at the Panama Papers, you look at all the shit that has happened in the United States with money laundering and all that. I mean,
Mm.
maybe we got to fix that. You know what I'm saying?
We
Maybe we
need the
got to fix
Safe
that.
Banking Act. That'll stop it.
Right, right. But I guess that's what I'm saying is like, oh, okay, yeah, those are good. It's not that those aren't good proposals, but it does open you up to the fact that like, oh crap, that's not the country we live in though. So maybe we got to change that part of it, which is a whole different. I mean, that's so much bigger than cannabis. But anyways, I like that about cannabis because, like
I'm
you
trying to get
said,
Shalene on the show too.
yeah, she's cool. You reach out. I know that she's like on and off Twitter, but that's how I got her on the show. I
We
just
we talked a couple times. She said she's a little busy right now, but I think I'm going to be able to swing it eventually. She seems
oh
like
yeah,
definitely someone I should talk to.
she'll get on there for
Yeah,
you. Same thing happened with me when I reached out. She busy person, so
yeah.
it was like a few months before I got her on. But yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways,
Well, Cole, I got to the end of my question. Well, it's not the end, but I got like another fucking hour and a half in there. I'm getting kind of tired. I was hoping maybe we could wrap this one and pick it up another time.
yeah,
Cool.
absolutely.
Well,
That sounds
dude,
good to me.
okay. Well, I want to thank you for your time, but I always leave the last word for my guests. So if you want to shamelessly plug anything, or if we missed anything that you want to mention, please do that now. And for real, dude, this has been fascinating. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you, man. And thanks for a chance to quickly shamelessly plug some things. So real quick, chillinois.net/podcast. You can find if you go there, you can pick your preferred streaming platform and listen to my show. Since we talked a lot about testing and dirty cannabis and stuff like that, I actually helped the Chicago Sun-Times with an investigation into Illinois cannabis, and they found that, most products they tested had contaminants in them.
Hmm.
They did an audit, right, on the test results. And so if you want to read about that and listen to the episode, it's episode 182. And then in the podcast description, there will be a series of stories into the investigation of cannabis in Illinois. And I'm sure you can gain insights and apply that to other states, because these testing practices are more or less uniform in most states.
Mm-hmm.
And then one other thing I just wanted to plug, since we mentioned it earlier, I've been doing this series with legal sex workers in the United States, and a lot of people have been like, whoa, they've been like totally blown or not blown away, but just kind of like, why are you doing this? You talk about weed and shit all the time. Why are you talking about sex? And it's really not about sex. It's not like I'm asking the people like, what's your technique when you do that? No. It's the fact that, again, it's a quasi legal industry, right? What we started the show with, and this taboo, and, arguably only the people that are participating in the thing should be the ones to say whether or not they can do that. I don't feel like the government should have a place in two consenting adults having that type of thing.
Seriously, if you can't rent out your fucking holes for some gas money, like,
But
where are we
see,
at here?
I got to be clear that that's not what it's about. It's really about the fact that the industry, there's only 21 brothels in the United States, 21 legal brothels, and they're in rural areas of Nevada. I'm
Sure.
fascinated by working conditions, and I will just say that some of the things I found in my conversations are both empowering and extremely frightening. And I'm not even being dramatic right now. Like, some of the stories have stuck with me. They're very like I said, either very empowering or very, very fucked up. You know, as you may know in life, you know, the truth is somewhere in the middle. Sometimes, you know, not everything's a monolith. So some people have great experiences, some people don't. If people want to hear more about that, that's chillinois.net/sex.
Awesome.
So thank you for letting me have the final word, and thanks for chatting with me today, Caleb. I really appreciate the format of your show. Long format shows are where it's at because we can have these nuanced conversations, and you're the man. So
Dude, I hope we can do it again sometime.
absolutely. I'll be down.
Peace, Cole. Take care.
See ya.